They didn't put my name on the invitation. Just, Mr. and Mrs. Richard Carter request the honor of your presence at the engagement celebration of their son, Jason Carter, to Miss Sarah Miller. No mention of me, no sister of the groom, not even a polite nod to family. Just the curated image, the child they praised, and the child they preferred not to mention. If you've ever walked into a family event and felt like your name had been scrubbed out of the story, subscribe to Revenge with Seren. Some of us weren't forgotten. We were erased. I stood outside the rooftop restaurant in La Jolla, watching the flicker of candlelight through the glass walls. The skyline pressed in behind me. For a second, I nearly turned around. But I walked in. It had been years since I stood in a room full of people who only knew the version of me my parents allowed, the version they pitied or ignored. Jason spotted me near the entrance. His laugh stalled mid-sentence. "Shelley," he said, like we were still kids, "you actually came." "You invited me," I replied, keeping my coat on. "Well, Mom did." The room was designed to impress. Velvet seating, tall orchid arrangements, wine glasses that glowed like crystal in the downlighting. My father stood near the center, entertaining Sarah's parents. My mother was adjusting the dessert forks as if the staff hadn't placed them with tweezers already. "Oh, Michelle," she said when she noticed me. Her eyes scanned me top to bottom. "You look pulled together." I nodded, no smile. My place card had been placed at the far end of the table. Not banished, exactly, but distant enough to remind me. Then I saw her. Sarah, Jason's fiancée. She stood to greet me with a warm, steady smile. "I'm so glad you're here," she said. "Jason's told me a little." I offered a polite smile. "Only the flattering bits, I hope." Her laugh was quiet, honest. "We'll see." Dinner was choreographed. First course, compliments to Jason's career. Second course, anecdotes about his childhood charm. Dessert, a toast to his new title at the firm. My father raised his glass. "To Jason," he said, "our son who stayed the course, who kept focus, who never made us doubt his future." Polite claps followed. My mother dabbed her eyes with a linen napkin. Jason offered a performance of humility. Everyone drank. No one asked about me, until Sarah turned. "So, Michelle, what do you do?" she asked. Before I could answer, my father laughed. "Michelle's our free spirit," he said. "She's always had a creative streak, passion projects, not quite corporate, but it keeps her busy." My mother added, "She's good with tech, always tinkering." I picked up my glass but didn't drink. "I run a tech platform," I said calmly. "It's called Access Path. We help disabled patients navigate the healthcare system, find specialists, connect to care, organize support." Jason reached for the wine again. My father offered a distracted nod. "Sounds very purposeful, niche, but that's nice. Good to stay engaged." I didn't answer. Sarah tilted her head slightly. "Access Path?" she said. "The teal interface? With integrated resource mapping ? I met her eyes. "Yes." She blinked. Her silver fork paused over the edge of her plate. "My brother uses that," she said slowly. "Mark. After the car accident, his caseworker showed it to us. It helped us find his specialist, his therapist. It was everything." I said nothing. Sarah leaned forward now. "Wait, you're Michelle Carter? You're the CEO?" The air around the table thinned. I saw it hit. My father's hand stilled mid-air. My mother's face slackened, her practiced smile gone. Jason froze, jaw tight. Sarah's voice softened, but she wasn't done. "You're the founder? The CEO?" I nodded. The silence cracked. For a moment, no one moved. Then I watched my father's hand, once strong, confident, slowly lower his glass. My mother's expression faltered, a shadow creeping behind her eyes. Jason looked like someone had unplugged him. Sarah's eyes didn't waver. "You built that?" "My family depends on it. I had no idea." I gave a small, measured smile, and just like that, their carefully curated version of me collapsed. The daughter they called the drifter, the sibling they placed behind centerpieces and talking points. Tonight, they remembered my name. Have you ever been excluded from your own family's story until someone outside it saw who you really were? Tell me in the comments. Maybe we've all been written out once. No one spoke. It was the first time I could remember complete silence around a Carter family table. The music from the quartet faded into background static. The clink of glasses from nearby tables seemed to come from another floor entirely. My father was the first to blink. He lowered his wine glass with measured slowness, like putting down a loaded weapon. His face didn't show anger, just confusion. My mother looked at me the way she might look at a chandelier that had cracked unexpectedly. And Jason just sat there, his entire posture rigid, as if trying to freeze time before it could settle. Sarah turned to me again. "You built that?" "My family depends on it." I had no idea. I offered a small, measured smile. "Most people don't." My mother laughed then, lightly, too quickly. "Well, Michelle's always had that techie side. Remember that coding club you tried sophomore year? What was that program called?" I didn't answer. "She's always been our little inventor," my father added, voice warming into a tone he usually reserved for public storytelling. "Loved puzzles, used to spend hours on those little circuit boards in the garage. So clever." They were scrambling, trying to turn me into an origin anecdote, something safe, something they could narrate. Sarah didn't let them. "It's not just clever," she said. "It's important, life-changing, honestly. Mark's team still uses Access Path. His rehab coordinator sends the link to new patients weekly." My father cleared his throat, his voice tightening. "Well, it's certainly good to know that our Michelle is putting her mind to something so practical. It's niche, but noble." Jason took a long sip of wine. "It's not niche," Sarah said without looking away from me. "It's national, or close, isn't it?" I nodded again. 15 states, 80,000 active users. We onboarded 3 nonprofit health systems last quarter. We just closed a Series A funding round. There it was, my voice, calm, grounded, factual. I didn't raise it, I didn't perform, I just let the numbers speak. My father's smile pulled tighter. "Of course, that's still quite different from Jason's scale. Global finance, international clients, billions under management. But yes, very commendable." It wasn't a comparison, but he made it one. And Jason? He still hadn't said a word. His jaw flexed. He adjusted his cuffs like they'd suddenly become too tight. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Across the table, Sarah's mother, quiet until now, spoke. "That's fascinating, truly. I'd love to hear more about how it works." My father cut in quickly. "You know, Jason's firm is actually exploring some healthcare ventures now. Digital wellness platforms, early-stage portfolios. Perhaps there's some synergy down the line." Synergy. I kept my expression neutral. That was the word they always used when trying to loop me back into something that looked like praise, not out of recognition, out of usefulness. Then he stood, glass in hand. "I think," he said, projecting just enough to draw the attention of nearby guests, "it's time for a proper toast." He lifted his glass toward Jason, who looked like he hadn't quite recovered from being displaced as the center of gravity. "To our son," my father began, his voice rich and resonant, "who has always made us proud, who stayed focused, stayed driven, and built a future that reflects the best of what we hoped for. To Jason." Polite applause, clinking glasses. My mother blinked back her cue of tears. Jason dipped his head in practiced humility. I didn't raise my glass, and neither did Sarah. I watched my father glance sideways, registering the break in symmetry. But he said nothing. The script was already written. All he could do was keep reading it aloud. Dinner resumed. The servers brought out something caramelized and impossibly small on rectangular plates. I barely touched mine. Jason tried to steer the conversation back to portfolio management, but Sarah didn't follow. She turned to me instead. "You've spoken at conferences, right?" "A few," I said. "I think I saw an article about your platform in Forbes Health. I didn't connect it to you at the time." Most people don't. Until they do, she said softly. I excused myself after dessert. Not dramatically, just quietly. I left my linen napkin folded the way they taught us at etiquette camp 15 years ago. As I walked toward the edge of the rooftop, the city opened in front of me, lights layered like stacked memory. I leaned against the glass railing and let the night air touch my face. The sky was cold and wide, and for once I didn't feel small beneath it. I heard footsteps behind me. A pause. Then Sarah's voice. Sorry if I caused a stir. You didn't. They just didn't know. I tried to tell them, I said calmly. Many times. She nodded. They weren't ready to hear it. I didn't answer. Because the truth was, they'd never been ready for any version of me that didn't fit their image. The silent one, the drifting one, the girl they didn't understand, so they decided not to ask. Sarah moved beside me, looking out at the same skyline. You know, when Jason talked about you, I always got the sense that you were distant, soft-spoken. He never said much. He didn't know much. But I think he knew enough to feel threatened. That's why he kept it vague. I glanced at her. That's generous. She smiled faintly. It's the only thing that makes sense now. A moment passed. The lights blinked below us. Traffic moved like veins through the city. She looked back toward the table. They're going to try to reframe it now. Act like they always knew. Like they were proud, just quiet about it. I know. But you'll know the truth. I nodded. I've known it for a while. 2 days later, my mother called. That alone was strange enough. She never called without a reason, and that reason was usually Jason. Michelle, she said, overly warm, I wanted to apologize for the seating arrangements. The hotel just didn't have enough room near the head table. I let the silence sit. And, she added quickly, your father felt it would be easier for Jason to greet his clients without distraction. Distraction. That was how they had framed me. Not a daughter, not a guest. A disruption in a script they had rehearsed too tightly. I didn't respond. Well, your father was hoping you might come to the brunch on Sunday, she said. The Danforths will be there. It might be a good chance to reconnect. There it was. The real ask. Reputational repair. The Danforths were Jason's future in-laws. Old money, old wine, and old ideas. They were financing part of his firm's next expansion. My presence, newly revealed, had become useful. I gave a non-committal answer and hung up. When Sunday arrived, I didn't dress for brunch. I dressed for clarity. Charcoal blazer, minimal jewelry, flat shoes. No silk, no lace, no nods to softness, just structure. And when I entered the dining room at the hotel, every head at that long table turned toward me. Jason looked stunned to see me. Sarah smiled slightly. She was the only one. My mother stood up like she might embrace me, but her arms only twitched and returned to her sides. I sat at the far end of the table, not at the head, not at the foot, just outside their control. Michelle, my father said, raising a glass of mimosa, we were just discussing the volatility in startup valuations. I imagine you were, I replied evenly. Jason cleared his throat. We've actually had a few interesting investor pullbacks this quarter. Makes me wonder who's really vetting founders these days. I met his gaze. Interesting. Access Path just had our cap table reviewed by Rothman Capital. They called our financial stewardship exemplary. That silenced the table. Sarah's father, Mr. Danforth, leaned in. You're with Rothman? No, I said. They came to us. My father shifted uncomfortably. My mother reached for her glass. Jason tried to rally. Well, of course, early-stage platforms can scale fast, but they also crash fast. And yet here I am, I said softly. 5 years, debt-free, personally funded. I own 64% equity, no debt dilution, no offshore tricks. There it was, the real weight of the moment. Because they had always assumed I was someone who drifted, who needed help, who had failed quietly somewhere between sophomore year and now. But this was not a favor. This was not a comeback. This was architecture. Sarah's mother spoke next. Michelle, if you don't mind me asking, what made you start something like that? I paused for a breath. I built Access Path for people like my roommate in college. She was in recovery after a spinal injury, but her insurance wouldn't cover adaptive rehab, so I wrote a basic map that connected her to care through nonprofit networks. And that became a business? She asked. It became a necessity, I said. Then a platform, then a movement, then yes, a business. Jason looked down at his plate. For once he didn't have the words. That was when I did something I hadn't planned. I pulled out my tablet, slid it across the white linen toward Mr. Danforth. Investor dashboard, I said. Access path, last 2 quarters. Feel free to browse. He tapped, scrolled. His brows rose. This is very clean, he murmured. I've seen Series B dashboards that aren't half this disciplined. Because I didn't build it for exits, I said quietly. I built it to last. That was the moment. The turn. Because every face at that table had to contend with a new version of me, one they couldn't dismiss or reshape. Not the investor's daughter, not Jason's sister, just Michelle Carter, founder and CEO. Sarah's father leaned back and gave a thoughtful nod. We may want to discuss a grant model our foundation's been working on. You're based in D.C.? For now, I said. We're expanding west next year. My father finally spoke again. Of course, Michelle's always been very determined. It was the first compliment I'd received from him in years, even if it came with caveats, even if it tasted of pride served cold. But I didn't come here for his pride. I came to reclaim what I never gave up. After brunch, Sarah caught up with me in the lobby. I can't believe you showed the dashboard, she said, smiling. Seemed like the right moment. They're all recalibrating around you now. I met her eyes. Let them. 2 days after brunch, I received an email from my father, just a line and a half. Thank you for attending Sunday's event. We'll be in touch if anything further is needed. That was it. Not a question, not an apology, not even a proper goodbye, just a transactional placeholder dressed up as formality. But it didn't sting. It felt like confirmation. They weren't sure what version of me they were talking to anymore, and that was just fine with me. Later that afternoon, my phone buzzed with an incoming call. Jason. I let it go to voicemail. 5 minutes later, another call. Then a text. Can we meet? Just you and me. I stared at the message for a while. Not because I was conflicted. I wasn't. But because I knew what this meant. Not regret. Not apology. Control. I picked a quiet corner table at a wine bar near DuPont Circle. Nothing formal, neutral ground, no family photos, no echoes of childhood kitchens or shared bedrooms, just polished wood and silence. When Jason walked in, he looked tired, rumpled shirt, no tie, a little less invincible than usual. Michelle, he started, sliding into the seat across from me. I wanted to clear the air. Go ahead. He took a sip of water, then leaned forward, elbows on the table. You blindsided us. I tilted my head. By existing? You know what I mean, he snapped, then caught himself. I mean by showing up like that, throwing those numbers around in front of Dad, in front the Danforths. You made me look unprepared. You were, I said calmly. His mouth opened, then closed again. I let the silence stretch, let him sit in it. He tried again. Look, I know we've had tension, but this isn't helping either of us. You mean it's not helping you? His eyes flashed. You think just because you built something on your own, you get to rewrite the whole family dynamic? No, I said. I think the family dynamic rewrote itself when you assumed I was still the girl who failed calculus. He exhaled, slow and frustrated. I'm just saying, it would have been better if you'd told me. If you'd brought the family in earlier, we could have done something. Together. You mean like I did at 16 when I asked to sit in on your first pitch meeting and you told me to stay in my lane? He flinched. I didn't press further. I didn't have to. Jason, I said, this isn't about humiliation. It's about reality. You're not the only one at the table anymore." He shook his head like he still didn't quite believe it. Then he tried another tactic. "You've done great, Michelle. Seriously, but the kind of growth you're seeing? It only lasts if you scale right, if you partner up." I folded my hands. "And I suppose you're offering to help me scale?" "Not me," he said quickly, "but my firm. We've got reach. We could take Access Path national in 6 months, get it in front of federal health networks, real clients, if you're open to it." I looked at him for a long time. It wasn't a terrible offer, but it wasn't clean either, and it certainly wasn't coming from a place of generosity. "I already have clients in 6 states," I said. "I already have a federal grant pending, and I already know you had your analyst pull our public filings last month." His eyes widened. How did you?" "I have alerts. I watch who watches us." Jason leaned back. "You're not going to make this easy, are you?" I smiled, but there was no malice in it. "I'm not here to make it easy. I'm here to build what I was told I never could." He didn't respond. I reached into my bag and slid a slim folder across the table. "Since you're so interested, here's our most recent valuation sheet, audited last quarter, fully transparent." He opened it, glanced over the top lines. Revenue, growth trajectory, user retention, institutional partners. "Jesus," he whispered, "this is real." I stood, gathered my coat, and paused. "You're smart, Jason. You just didn't think I was." Then I walked out. Not because I won, but because I finally stopped playing his game. I didn't go to the engagement shoot. The invitation had arrived like a polite afterthought, wrapped in pastel fonts and finished with a note from my mother that read, "Would love to see you there if your schedule allows." As if the brunch hadn't happened, as if the silence afterward was just a season we'd moved past. I didn't respond immediately. I sat with it for a day, maybe 2, and then I typed something simple. "Thank you, but I won't be available that weekend." No apology, no softened edges, just truth, delivered without padding. No one followed up. No one said, "You'll be missed." The silence after that was its own RSVP. The shoot went ahead as scheduled, Saturday afternoon at Golden Oaks Winery, a venue I had introduced to the family 2 years ago during a corporate tasting trip. Back then, I had just signed my second nonprofit integration deal, and we had all toasted under those same string lights. Jason had said, "This place is amazing, Shelley." My mother had taken a picture of the vineyard rose and told her book club it was her discovery, but no one remembered that part now. At 8:17 p.m. that Saturday night, my phone buzzed. It was a message from my mother. No words, just images. Jason in a linen blazer, Sarah glowing in blush silk, the vineyard behind them glowing like something out of a magazine. One photo after another. Laughter, champagne, laughter again. My parents standing beside them in practiced poses. And then the last photo, titled Final Pick Heart. In it, Jason and Sarah stood between my parents, all mid-laugh, polished, perfect. But what caught my eye wasn't them. It was a woman on the far left of the frame, almost cropped out but not quite, a headset in one ear, clipboard tucked under her arm, wearing a tan blouse I didn't recognize. She was smiling. Then came the message, just 2 lines. "Olivia made sure it all went smoothly. We didn't even notice you weren't there." My chest didn't clench, my hands didn't shake. I just stared at the screen and felt something calcify. They hadn't just excluded me, they had replaced me, not in name, in function. Someone else had been brought in to fill the space I left behind, to ensure the photos were lit just right, that timelines were followed, that things went smoothly. And the message? It wasn't a thoughtless slip, it was precision. We didn't even notice. I set the phone down and let the memory of Golden Oaks return, not through photos, but smell. The citrus of crushed grape skins, the cool air of the barrel room, the sound of Jason's laugh echoing through the stone arches the first time I booked a table there for our family. Back then, I had asked the event director for a contact sheet in case we ever wanted to host something formal. I still had it. They had used my blueprint, but forgotten the architect. 3 days later, I ran into my mother at Cedar and Pine, the cafe I use for quiet investor meetings. She was standing at the flower counter, waiting on a bouquet, pink peonies and ranunculus, all soft elegance. "Oh, Michelle," she said, startled like I'd broken some invisible boundary. "Hi," I replied evenly. She glanced at the laptop bag over my shoulder. "You look busy." "I am. Working on one of your ventures?" Her voice dipped, like it was something whimsical. I just blinked. "We missed you Saturday," she offered. I tilted my head. "The engagement shoot," she clarified. "It turned out beautifully. Did you see the photos?" "I did." She smiled, almost pleased with herself. Then, as if on cue, "Was everything okay?" "Yes." She hesitated. "Well, Sarah said you've been traveling a lot." I didn't answer. Instead, I pulled out my phone, scrolled, and showed her the screenshot Sarah had quietly sent me after brunch, a forwarded message. "Just avoid talking about Michelle's company, okay? I think it makes Jason feel a little uncomfortable." My mother's eyes glanced at the screen, then back at me. She didn't need to read it again. "Sarah didn't send that to hurt you," I said softly. "She sent it because even she can tell the difference between inclusion and performance." Her expression hardened. "That was private. And yet it dictated how you treated me in public." "You're making this bigger than it is, Michelle." "No," I said. "You're just upset it's no longer small enough to control." She hugged the bouquet tighter. "Why are you always so dramatic?" "I'm not," I replied. "You just preferred when I was quiet." She looked around, eyes scanning the room like a woman seeking escape. "You didn't replace me with Olivia," I said. "You replaced the discomfort of having to see me, with someone easy to edit into the frame." Her mouth parted slightly, but nothing came out. "I'm not angry," I continued. "I'm not looking for an apology." I stepped back. "I just won't pretend anymore." That night, as the city lights blinked outside my apartment window, my phone lit up again. A new message. From my father. Just 3 words. "Dinner? Just us?" I stared at it for a long time. And then I replied, "Tell me when." I arrived early, not because I was eager, but because I wanted to control how it felt to walk into that room. The engagement dinner was being held at a private club downtown, one of those velvet-curtained, hush-toned places where the walls feel like they remember wealth more than people. My name wasn't on the seating chart. That much I expected. I scanned the long table, saw the place cards carefully arranged around the center, Jason and Sarah at the heart, my parents to their right, a string of family and colleagues branching out. My name was nowhere. But I saw one empty seat at the very end, beside the dessert cart. Of course. I took it without blinking. The waiter handed me a menu I didn't need and didn't bother asking what I wanted to drink, so I requested a Bordeaux, straight and clean, and watched the table fill. Jason arrived with that glossy confidence that only sons like him perfect, tight suit, a laugh that fills the room before he says anything of substance. Sarah looked breathtaking. She always did. A golden shimmer on her collarbone, a subtle wave in her hair, elegance you could smell. No one greeted me, not even my mother, not even Sarah this time. I had expected discomfort. What I hadn't expected was the toast. My father rose after the appetizer course, his hands raised slightly, voice clear. "Thank you all for coming. Tonight is a proud moment, for our family, for Jason, for the legacy he continues." I froze. I knew this tone. "I've watched my son grow into a man of vision," he continued, "driven, accomplished, and now engaged to a woman of equal brilliance." Glasses lifted, laughter rippled. "He's the kind of son any father would be proud of." There was a pause, and then the line that curled like ice in my spine. "And we're lucky to have Michelle with us tonight, too." Just like that. An afterthought. No description. No warmth, no mention of what I had built, no nod to access path, not even the grace of a smile in my direction. A few people looked toward me politely. One woman I didn't know even whispered, "Is she a cousin?" Jason didn't look at me. He lifted his glass, sipped, and turned back to Sarah, and then I heard him say it. "She's just here for the wine." He wasn't whispering, he wasn't shouting, but the table near me caught it. So did I. So did Sarah, who turned her eyes downward. It was a sentence meant to vanish, to hang in the air for a beat and dissolve, but it didn't. I felt my chest tighten, then loosen, strangely, because in that moment, something broke, quietly, without drama, and I knew exactly what to do. I called over the same waiter, the one who'd finally brought my wine. "Would you mind passing a note?" I asked calmly. "To the bride." He looked surprised, but nodded. I reached into my clutch and pulled out one of my embossed calling cards, cream with navy lettering. Michelle Carter, founder and CEO, Access Path Ventures. Below that, I scribbled 4 words in my cleanest handwriting: "Thank you for tonight." He delivered it discreetly. I watched Sarah's fingers open the card beneath the table. Her lips moved silently as she read it. Then her brows twitched. Her mouth opened just slightly. And then, her eyes met mine. A shift. Small, but not insignificant. She leaned toward Jason and murmured something. His gaze flickered to me for the first time that night, and just as quickly, turned away. I didn't need them to say anything. I didn't want a reaction. I just wanted to place truth where the erasure had been. I had built something none of them could ignore if they had ever bothered to look. 10 minutes later, while dessert was being cleared, Sarah got up and walked toward me. She bent slightly and smiled. It was tentative. "I had no idea," she said, her voice so low only I could hear. "Most people don't," I replied. "They already decided who I was a long time ago." She looked down, as if trying to find a place to anchor her next sentence. "I think I made assumptions." "You're not the only one," I said. "But you're the first to admit it." She nodded once. "It won't happen again." And I believed her. Not because of guilt, but because power, once seen, can't be unseen. As she returned to her seat, I saw my mother look at her curiously. My father leaned in to whisper something. Sarah didn't answer. She just folded the card and slipped it into her clutch. The night ended as I expected, without hugs, without parting words, just the shuffle of chairs and the click of heels on polished marble. But as I walked out of that restaurant, I knew one thing for sure. They would remember I was there. Not because I raised my voice, but because I had finally stopped lowering it. I was not supposed to be at the rehearsal dinner. At least that's what Sarah's mother said when she saw me step through the courtyard doors of the Foxglove estate. "Oh," she blinked, adjusting her bracelet like I was a misplaced detail in the floral arrangements. "We didn't expect you to join tonight. It's mostly for the bridal party and close family." The words weren't cruel, but they were accurate, deliberate, polite in the way women say, "That dress is brave." I smiled. Well, I'm family, and Jason did say there was an extra seat. He hadn't, but at this point I had stopped waiting for doors to open. I wore navy, sharp, sleeveless, structured, not loud, not begging to be seen, just impossible to ignore. The fabric kissed my frame like it knew what I'd carried to get here. In my ears were the same pearl drops I wore when I signed the Access Path merger in New York. A reminder to myself, I belonged wherever I walked. Still, as I crossed the patio stones, I felt the hush ripple like glass cracking in water. Eyes flickered, smiles thinned. I didn't come here to reclaim space. I came to show I never left it. The seating was round table style this time, set beneath soft string lights and arching oak trees. I chose a seat near the edge, letting the night unfold without asking it to bend. Jason didn't greet me, but Sarah did. She walked over after the second toast, this time without the stiffness. Her clutch stayed at her side. "I liked your note," she said quietly. I nodded. "I meant it." She sat beside me without asking. It startled me, but I didn't show it. For a moment we just watched the table, her cousins buzzing about flower crowns, Jason joking with groomsmen, my mother adjusting napkins with precise disdain. Then she spoke. My mother asked if you were still trying to make a statement. I raised an eyebrow. And what did you say? That you were never making one. You were living yours. I let that sit for a second. Then I asked, why tell me that? She looked down at her hands. Because I'm realizing they all talk about you like you're a shadow, but I've started noticing you're the only one walking in full daylight. It was quiet after that, until the next toast. This time, Jason's best man stood, one of those old friends from high school whose tie was too loud and laughed too quick. To Jason, he beamed, lifting a glass, who somehow survived growing up with two sisters, one who practically raised him and one who showed him how to outshine everyone. Laughter, a ripple across the table. I didn't move, but I felt it. That small snort of humor from someone behind me, that awkward smile from my aunt. Even Sarah looked like she wanted to interrupt. But no one did. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't flinch. I didn't walk out. I simply reached for my water, took a slow sip, and let the moment pass. Because I knew what they didn't. The next day, the wedding would go on as planned. The seating chart would still place me near the edge. The photographer would still try to crop me out of the family frame. But I also knew something else. That morning, I had signed off on a venture deal. AccessPath had just acquired a controlling interest in the very hospitality group that owned Foxglove Estate. I didn't need a spotlight. The foundation beneath their celebration now partially belonged to me. When the laughter faded and dessert was served, Sarah turned to me and whispered, "I heard." I met her gaze. "About the estate," she clarified. "That was you, wasn't it?" I didn't nod. I didn't confirm. I simply looked her in the eye and said, "Sometimes being overlooked is the best vantage point." She blinked, slowly, then smiled. Not with pity, with recognition. And that, more than any speech, more than any title, was the moment the legacy began to shift. Not in their eyes, but in mine. I did not speak to anyone in my family for 2 weeks. Not because I was angry. Anger was loud, combustible, reactive. What I carried now was quieter. It was a full-bodied understanding that silence could speak volumes, that silence could be a decision, not a retreat. Jason's texts had slowed after his third apology. Each one danced around the word sorry, like it was a fragile ornament he didn't know how to hold. My mother had emailed once about important RSVPs, but not a single word acknowledged what had happened at the engagement dinner. My father? Nothing. His absence was, as always, complete. I spent those 2 weeks moving at my own rhythm. I chaired a global summit on emerging tech policy. I got a personal note from the Secretary of Commerce after my keynote was picked up by Bloomberg. And then I received something unexpected. A phone call from one of the local stations in my hometown. The woman on the other end introduced herself quickly. "I know this might be sudden, Michelle," she said, "but there's a lot of talk in the state business community about your rise. The Carter family name is known around here, but no one knew your story. Would you be open to an interview?" I paused. She must have felt my hesitation. "You don't have to talk about the past. We want to focus on what you've built, the mentorship program, your work with young women in STEM. You've become a symbol here, even if it wasn't planned." Even if it wasn't planned, that line stuck with me. I said yes. 2 days later, I was sitting across from her in a bright studio with white walls and filtered lighting. The questions were kind, thoughtful, and for the first time, I didn't flinch when I said my hometown aloud. I was told I failed, but maybe what they meant was that I didn't follow the blueprint. "Who told you that?" she asked gently. I looked at her and said calmly, "The people who raised me." The interview aired 3 days later. Within 24 hours, my inbox was overflowing. Local businesswomen reached out. Mothers of girls who wanted to code wrote to thank me. My story spread, not because I forced it into the world, but because I told the truth without flinching. That same night, Jason showed up at my office. He did not come with flowers. He did not bring Sarah, just himself, his hands twisting nervously at his sides. I was walking out of a meeting when I saw him standing near reception. "Michelle," he said quickly, stepping forward. I didn't stop walking. "Michelle, please, just a minute." I turned slowly, giving him a look that asked whether he really wanted this minute to happen in a glass hallway, in front of an assistant who now viewed me as a founder, not a forgotten sister. He looked down, then back up, his voice lower. "Can we talk? Privately?" I gestured to a side conference room. I didn't sit, neither did he. "I saw the interview," he started. "Mom's furious. She says you embarrassed the family." I smiled thinly. "Good, that means she watched it." Jason exhaled. "You don't get it. She's spinning, saying you twisted everything, that you were never cut out for law, and that's why I built a company that's about to be acquired for 9 figures?" I interrupted quietly. His jaw tensed. "I'm not defending her. This is all a mess." "No, Jason. This is clarity. You all wanted to ignore me because I didn't fit your script. Now the world sees me for who I am, and you're scrambling because you realize I no longer need your approval." He looked down again. I took a breath. "You said you didn't know, and I believe that. But not knowing isn't neutral. Not knowing is still a choice when you've had years to ask." "I was just trying to keep peace." "There's a difference between peace and silence, Jason. You all kept things quiet so no one had to deal with your discomfort. That's not peace. That's erasure." He didn't argue. I opened the door. "I have a meeting in 5. He stepped past me, paused. "For what it's worth, Sarah cried when she saw your segment. She said she's ashamed of how she treated you." "That's her burden," I said. "Not mine." He left. I returned to my meeting with a quiet fire under my skin. Later that night, I received another email from the station. The interview had gone viral, picked up by a national platform. My face was now featured under the headline, "From Family Rejection to CEO, the Woman Who Rewrote Her Story." I stared at it for a long time. That headline. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about being right. It was about finally being visible. It was about becoming whole. The week after the interview felt surreal. Not loud, not triumphant, just steady. Like the hum of something finally working. Emails poured in, some from strangers, some from girls coding in basement clubs, some from colleagues I hadn't heard from in years. A few were from people I never thought I'd hear from again. One was from my 9th grade math teacher. "I watched you walk out of my class with your head down more times than I can count. Turns out I should have asked what you were building instead of what you were missing." Another was from a Columbia classmate who once joked about me ghosting the Ivy League. "Turns out you didn't vanish. You just became too big to see through the lens we were handed." And then there was the envelope. Not digital, not mass-forwarded, a real envelope, cream-colored, hand-addressed to my office, no return name, just a wax seal in the shape of a compass. I opened it slowly. Inside was a single sheet of heavyweight stationery. "Michelle, I owe you a direct apology. You don't need me to name myself, but I will anyway, because hiding behind regret without accountability is just more erasure. I'm Sarah, and I see it now. I saw it at brunch. I saw it again at Foxglove. I saw it every time I watched you take up less space because someone else needed the spotlight. You were never the disappointment. We were just too dim to recognize your kind of brilliance. Thank you for never breaking in front of us, and for letting me break a little so I could finally learn. I don't expect a reply. Just wanted you to have this on real paper, because some truths deserve weight." It wasn't signed with flourish, just S. I read it twice, then a third time, not to dissect it, but to let it land. Sarah had no reason to write that, no agenda, no performance, just honesty. I placed the letter back in its envelope and tucked it into the drawer where I kept my earliest pitch notes, the ones written on graph paper, coffee-stained, hopeful. It belonged there, not as a prize, but as proof that perception can shift when someone chooses to see. Later that week, a local business magazine published a follow-up editorial, "How the Sister in the Background Became the Woman at the Table." It quoted my panel speech from DC. It listed Access Path's expansion. It called me a builder of quiet power. That headline did something no family toast ever had. It gave me wholeness, without conditions. That night, I walked through Midtown, not fast, not busy, just present. There was a street cellist playing Clair de Lune beneath a scaffolding of blinking lights. I stopped. And for once, I didn't think about what came next. I just stood there, letting the notes fill the spaces that once felt hollow. My phone buzzed in my coat pocket. An unknown number. A simple text. "Are you free this weekend? I'd like to meet. Just the two of us. Dad." No emojis, no explanations. Just that. I didn't answer immediately. I read the message once, then again. And then I replied, "Saturday, 11 a.m., Bryant Park Cafe, outside." I chose the time, I chose the place. This time, I set the terms. The strange thing about healing is that it doesn't come with applause. It comes in silence, in changed routines, in the way your shoulders stop tensing when a certain name pops up in your inbox. A month after that conversation in the park, I was invited to speak at a panel called Women Who Shifted Legacy. I nearly declined, but my assistant Maya gently reminded me, "You told me once, if you don't claim your story, someone else will write it for you." So I said yes. The panel was part of a spring conference in D.C., all gray suits, espresso carts, and expensive lanyards, the kind of place I once wandered through invisible, younger and quieter, introduced as Jason's sister or the dropout from Columbia. But this time the nameplate in front of me said, "Michelle Carter, founder and CEO, Eastbridge Analytics." That morning, as I stood backstage, I received an unexpected message from Sarah. A photo. No words, just a snapshot of my brother, Jason, sitting on their apartment couch, holding a copy of Forbes Women, my face on the cover. I looked at it for a long time. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't scowling either. He looked thoughtful, maybe humbled, maybe something he didn't know how to name. It didn't matter. I tucked the phone away. When I walked onto the stage, the spotlight didn't startle me. The applause didn't fill some hole. What did was the moment one woman in the front row, mid-50s, sharp bob, tired eyes, clutched a notebook and whispered, "There she is." That was the echo I needed. During the panel, someone asked what advice I would give to women whose families still don't understand who they've become. I answered calmly, "Let go of needing to be understood. Focus instead on being undeniable." After the session, I took the train back to New York. No entourage. Just me, a coat folded over my lap, and the steady blur of trees rushing past the window. That evening, I returned home to a quiet apartment. My cat stretched across the windowsill like a painting. Dinner was leftover pasta and a single glass of wine. And yet, I felt full. That night, I opened an envelope I had been avoiding. My father's email had arrived the week before, his version of starting slow. In it, he wrote, "You were always moving faster than we knew how to follow. Maybe we didn't try hard enough. I hope in time, you'll let me learn who you are now." I didn't reply right away. Healing doesn't mean rushing to reattach old parts. Instead, I forwarded the message to my therapist with a single note. Progress? A week later, I ran into my mother at a gallery opening in the West Village. Not planned, not dramatic. She was there with an old family friend, and I was with Maya. We saw each other across the room. She stiffened. I didn't. She approached, slowly. Her hair was pulled back in the way it always had been when I was growing up. Tight, composed, helmet-like. "Michelle?" she said, tone careful. I nodded. "Mother." She looked me up and down, the way she used to before school recitals, before college interviews, before every moment I tried to be enough. "You look successful," she said. It was almost an accusation. "I am," I said gently. She blinked. "Well, that's good." There was a pause, a long one. Then I added, "You may not have raised the daughter you wanted, but you raised a woman who knew how to survive anyway." She didn't reply, but she didn't walk away either, and that, somehow, was enough. Weeks passed, seasons shifted, the city bloomed around me. I launched a mentorship program that summer, Undeniable, for women in finance and tech who were rebuilding after rejection. The first class had 12 women. By fall, it had grown to 47. One day, As I was leaving the office, Maya stopped me. "There's a delivery for you." It was a large envelope, hand-delivered, no return name. Inside was a wedding invitation, Jason and Sarah. I let out a quiet breath, not because I was hurt, but because I wasn't. They had not asked me to be in the bridal party, no special seat, just a line on the RSVP. But tucked beneath the card was a short note from Sarah. "You don't have to come, but I wanted you to know, this time you were invited. This time we knew who you are." I never sent the RSVP, but on the day of the wedding I did send flowers, simple white peonies, no note, just a small card with 2 words, "Walk boldly." And then I closed my laptop, poured another glass of wine, and sat by the window as rain began to fall over the city. Not waiting, not watching, just living, because some endings don't need a dramatic return. They need a quiet presence, a dignified peace, and a future that no longer asks for permission. This story is a quiet masterpiece of emotional retribution. Michelle Carter doesn't seek revenge, she seeks to be seen. And in doing so, she becomes the most compelling figure in her family's narrative. The story resonates because it's not just about triumph, it's about release. A reminder that power doesn't always shout. Sometimes it simply shows up, undeniable. Don't forget to tell your viewers, if this story echoed something deep in you, click subscribe. These aren't just revenge stories, they're recognitions.